Max had always been Jack's loyal companion. From the moment Jack had picked him out at the shelter, Max had known he was meant to be by his side. A golden retriever with a shiny coat and eager eyes, Max had spent countless hours chasing after tennis balls, running through fields, and lying next to Jack on lazy afternoons. Their bond was unbreakable, and Max was Jack's closest friend in the world. But today, everything felt different. Jack was acting strange. He was quieter than usual, his face etched with worry. Max could sense that something was wrong. Usually when Jack drove him to the park or the countryside, there was excitement in the air. But today, there was only silence. The car rolled through the streets, the hum of the engine a constant drone that Max had long grown used to. He stuck his head out of the window, the wind ruffling his fur, but he wasn't feeling the joy he usually did. The roads were unfamiliar, winding through neighborhoods Max had never seen. His tail wagged cautiously, unsure of what to make of the situation. He glanced up at Jack, his eyes full of questions. "Where are we going, Jack?" Max thought, but the only answer he got was Jack's stiff grip on the steering wheel and a quick glance in the rearview mirror. Max's heart began to race, a sense of unease gnawing at him. He watched the city slip away, replaced by endless stretches of countryside. The houses became fewer and the trees grew taller, their dark shadows stretching across the road like long ghostly fingers. The car finally slowed and pulled over to the side of a desolate road. Max's eyes widened in confusion. There were no familiar landmarks, no parks, no other people, just an empty stretch of asphalt surrounded by barren fields. "Stay here, Max." Jack's voice was tight, almost strangled as he opened the door to the car. "I'll be back soon." Max didn't understand. Jack had never told him to stay behind before. He followed Jack out of the car, his paws hitting the gravel, but Jack waved him off. "Stay in the car," Jack repeated, his voice hard, almost like a command. Max watched as Jack walked towards the distant woods, his figure growing smaller with every step. The knot in Max's stomach tightened. He didn't know why Jack was leaving him, but the anxiety was building inside him. Something was terribly wrong. He paced around the car, whining softly, waiting for Jack to return. Minutes passed, then an hour. Max's sense of time blurred, and the feeling of abandonment began to sink in. Why hadn't Jack come back? Where had he gone? Max's heart raced faster, and his anxiety began to spike. Every sound, the rustling of the wind, the occasional screech of a bird, only deepened the sense of isolation. Max didn't understand why Jack had left him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His paws grew sore from pacing, and his stomach growled. The day was slowly turning into night, and Max felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine. He had to find Jack. He couldn't wait any longer. With a final bark, Max jumped out of the car, his paws landing on the dirt road with a soft thud. He sniffed the air, trying to catch a familiar scent. His senses, as sharp as ever, didn't find what he was hoping for. There was nothing but the harsh scent of the earth and the breeze. Max didn't think. He just acted. He ran down the road, barking, his legs carrying him farther than he had ever gone. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows over the landscape, and Max could feel the chill creeping into his bones. The beginning of the search, Max ran for hours. His breath came in heavy bursts, his heart racing as he searched the empty fields, calling out for Jack. The more he ran, the further the distance between him and his home grew. The countryside was vast, a never-ending stretch of land with nothing to guide him. Max didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear. Jack had to be out there somewhere. Max's body ached with exhaustion, and his paws bled from running over the rough terrain. He stopped for a moment to catch his breath, panting heavily. His eyes scanned the horizon, and that's when he heard it. A soft whimper. Max's ears perked up and he turned toward the sound. There, lying under a tree, was a small, scruffy dog. Its fur was matted, its eyes dull and filled with fear. The dog looked up at Max, its tail tucked between its legs. Max approached cautiously, lowering his head in a gesture of reassurance. "Are you lost too?" Max thought, his heart aching for the little dog. It was a young puppy, no more than a few months old. Max bent down, sniffing the air. The puppy's scent was faint, and Max could tell it had been alone for a while. Max nudged the puppy gently with his nose, offering comfort. The puppy whined softly, its eyes flickering with a mix of confusion and gratitude. Max knew he couldn't leave the puppy alone. He couldn't abandon it, like Jack had abandoned him. Max stayed with the puppy for a few days, keeping watch over it while also continuing his search for Jack. They wandered through the countryside, growing weaker and more desperate with each passing day. Max knew he had to find Jack. The puppy had given him a new sense of responsibility. He couldn't leave it behind. The search intensified. Days turned into weeks. Max's coat grew dirty, and his once shiny fur became matted. His paws were worn raw from traveling, but he refused to stop. He wouldn't give up on Jack, not when he had come this far. He and the puppy reached the edge of the city, where the tall buildings rose like giant sentinels against the sky. Max's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the familiar street signs. He was close, closer than he had been in weeks. They wandered through the busy streets, Max keeping a careful eye on the traffic. The noise and the crowds were overwhelming, but Max kept moving forward. The search for Jack was all-consuming, and nothing could stop him now. One night, as Max and the puppy walked down a narrow alley, Max heard something that made his heart leap. Footsteps. His tail stood straight up as he turned toward the sound. Could it be? Max's eyes scanned the alley, and then he saw him, Jack. Standing at the end of the alley, his figure silhouetted against the dim streetlights. "Jack!" Max barked, his voice full of desperation. He ran toward him, his paws slipping on the wet ground. The puppy, sensing Max's excitement, followed closely behind. Jack turned slowly, his face pale and worn. His eyes met Max's, but there was no joy in his gaze. Max's heart sank. Something was wrong. Jack's hands trembled, and his expression was full of regret. He took a step toward Max, but stopped short. "I'm sorry, Max," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to leave you. I didn't mean to hurt you." Max stopped in his tracks. His heart was racing, but the reunion was not as sweet as he had imagined. The pain of being abandoned still lingered in his chest, and now he could see that Jack was broken too. Max didn't understand why Jack had done it, but he knew something had happened to make Jack leave him. "I had to go away," Jack continued, his voice cracking. "Things changed. I didn't know what else to do." Max's eyes softened. He wanted to forgive Jack. He wanted to believe him, but the feeling of abandonment, of being left alone on that road, was too fresh in his memory. The silence between them grew heavy, filled with unsaid words. Then Jack looked down at the puppy, his eyes filled with surprise. "You found her," he said softly. Max nodded. The puppy, now standing beside him, wagged its tail cautiously. Jack bent down and reached out to her. "I'm so sorry, little one. I'll take care of you now. Both of you." The return home Max and Jack stood there for what felt like hours, neither of them knowing what to say. Finally, Jack reached out and wrapped his arms around Max. He held him tightly, and for the first time since being abandoned, Max felt safe again. "I'll never leave you again, I promise," Jack whispered. "I was lost, but now I know where I belong." And so Max, Jack, and the puppy began the long journey back home. The road was not easy, but the bond between them had been reforged. The painful journey had taught them both something important, that love and loyalty were stronger than any obstacle, no matter how far apart they had been. They returned home, not just as a man and his dog, but as a family, bound by the trials they had faced and the love they had never lost.